Hi everybody, it's Josh. I'm just going to do a review of what Greg presented on the August 12th Skillful Teacher that has to do with the essential beliefs and um, the foundation for the work on expectations. So back in May, we told you that make sure to read chapter 2 of the book because it talked about the essential beliefs and that they were foundational in the Skillful Teacher course, and we believe in the work that we've done across the district. Today we're focusing on belief number 1, that all children have the raw materials to do rigorous academic material at high standards. This belief is the foundation of what we call the growth mindset. Now, in the Skillful Teacher, there's a part of chapter 12 that talks about the incrementalist effort-based belief. This is a mouthful, and so we just use growth mindset and fixed mindset as shorthand. And if you've been in the district for a while, you've probably seen this graphic. This is the one that we use primarily with students to help them get a visual metaphor for what we're talking about. So the fixed mindset, which is described here on the left side, is represented by a brick because it's unchanging and it stays the same throughout its lifetime, whereas the growth mindset is represented by the plant because given the right conditions like sunlight and carbon dioxide, etc., it can grow over time. So even though we've been working on this in our district for several years now, we know that we're fighting against a prevailing belief that has been embedded in our culture really for hundreds of years, and that is that of the fixed mindset. And so the first thing that Greg did on that day was he asked you to think about where do you see the remnants of the fixed mindset? What practices do you see in our schools that sends the message that intelligence and ability are innate and fixed? So the example that Greg gave was the gifted and talented program. Just the term gifted and talented implies that um, they are something that you're born with. Then after the teachers talked about that for a little bit, we shifted to talking about what are the dangers of reinforcing a fixed mindset. And this is when Greg told the story about in 4th grade how his teacher, he came in one day and his teacher had dumped out his desk because he was so disorganized. And after you guys thought about it and talked about it, Greg shared that this stayed with him not just through 4th grade, which he remembers as not a very good time in his life, but even when he was in his 20s and applying for jobs and the employer asked him what his weaknesses are and he said, "I'm not organized," even though at that point he was relatively organized. That belief stuck with him for a really long time. After that, Greg asked teachers to consider how they see the fixed mindset in their students. And one of the things that we've realized is that these behaviors, these aren't just in the students that are struggling in our schools. Some of the top performers in our schools, the straight A students, exhibit some of the fixed mindset tendencies. And so these students typically really struggle when they get to college because if they think that they're believe or that their intelligence is just given to them and that they don't have to work when they really struggle in their first year of college, they think maybe they're just not as smart as they thought they were. And so Greg pushed us to kind of think about how great it would be if all of our students had a growth mindset. And in class, he kind of joked about them embracing challenges like, yes, there's a really hard test today. But, you know, joking aside, persisting in the face of setbacks, seeing effort as a path to mastery, learning from the criticism when we spend our hours grading papers and putting comments on that they're actually inspired to learn from them. That's kind of what the goal is. And then finally, at the end of Greg's presentation, he talked about where we are as a society, and he mentioned two things that we see as positive trends. Last year, or maybe it was 2 years ago, USA Today had this thing about tips for going back to school, and one of them was don't trash talk about math. We hear it all the time, you know, English teachers or other teachers saying, "Yeah, I can't do math," or "and I'm not a math person." And for math teachers and for all of us, that's a problem because it's really reinforcing that mindset. And we certainly wouldn't hear kids or teachers or anybody saying, "Yeah, I'm not really a reader." And so we know that these are skills and not talents. Um, and then he actually quoted something from this summer, 5 things not to say to your kids, which I think was in the Mercury News, and the number one thing was, "You're so smart." And we'll talk about that, or we did talk about that later in the day and why that's a problem. So the final thing that Greg talked about as a kind of introduction was that we have to make sure that we don't think of this as a binary, that either you have a growth or a fixed mindset, but that we realize that all of us are on this continuum and move back and forth on it depending on the situation. For me personally, I have a more fixed mindset about artistic ability because I'm not artistic. And so I'm really pushing myself to kind of broaden my belief system to include all of those intelligences. And then at the very end, Greg urged us to consider this metaphor for building growth mindsets. We know that doing a presentation at the beginning of the school year is good, but it's not going to change kids' mindsets that have been built over time. And just like stalactites, um, the way that they're formed is a tiny, tiny, tiny bit at a time. As the water leaches through the limestone, it leaves a teeny calcium deposit when it drips down, and over years and years and years, it grows into these giant stalactites that you see. Same as with the growth mindset. It's the comments that we're making over and over and over again that will eventually help kids to change their mindset. So that was the beginning, and then Greg transitioned into Chelsea's, which will be the next video.